Right. So welcome everyone to panel 20. Day 2, heads full, bodies aching, but still full of excitable movements, certainly mine is. I'm particularly excited because this panel is full of things that I find exciting. We're going to be entering a neurodiverse space, which is a very exciting thing too. There will be animals, there will be international representation, all within 3 presentations. Isn't that amazing? So without further ado, I'll get out the way, and I will let Knut Sælør and Rosemary Bank tell you about, let me get the title right, Recovery-Oriented Dog Intervention. Our dog made us change our perception of recovery and flattened our ontologies. Thank you both.
So I should pin this at the shoulder then. Something like that. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can? Okay.
Go.
Yeah. Allegedly named after a dog show judge, RODI or RODI, which was our dog's name, was never a recovery-oriented dog intervention. We argue that a 4-legged companion not only changed our everyday lives, but also our perspectives on methodology and research.
Little did we know when we met back in 1994 what to expect or what has turned out to be the greater part of our lifespan. Looking back, neither ontology nor assemblages were on our minds when we, in 2008, searched the internet aiming to find a pet who could join our family of 2. Within philosophy and research, one can argue that ontology concerns the study of being, how we perceive the world. And this presentation concerns how a late dog has influenced our ontological stance and many of the dichotomies that traditionally separate I, you, we, dog.
Being part of our little family meant being part of more rainy days than sunny days, metaphorically. But the sunny days, oh, they were good days, with lots of walks in the woods and by the river, or visiting dog parks and our family and mutual friends. And almost always together with me, his mom. The rainy days were enjoyed on the sofa, snuggling with me under a rug, or sniffing in the garden and barking at passers-by while I was sitting on the toilet, sick or resting. Maybe not so rainy days after all. After several years of health problems, I started to search for places where I could end it all somewhere outside, surrounded by nature. I was looking for steep hillsides, hidden stone piles, peace. I remember these hikes most of all as a convulsive feeling in my belly, as a strong contraction, as a silent scream, and always in company with RODI. Leaving him alone was never an option, as he was my best travel buddy, and his eyes and tail communicated pure joy whenever I put my hiking shoes on. I just couldn't turn my back on him. Time and time again, this saved my life. He saved my life. I couldn't turn my back on him when I left the house, and I couldn't turn my back on him when I reached the cliff. At that very moment, the only thing I could focus on, except the piercing pain in my chest and belly, was the little living creature walking by my side, trusting, joyful, curious about life.
Like you, Rudi suffered lots of health issues that seemed to challenge the experts. We went to the vet and several specialists. We tried putting him on odd and restricted diets, hoping it would remedy his stomach problems, and ended up giving him medicine, which, it turned out, may have caused the cancer that eventually was the reason we decided to euthanize him, which was more easily said than done. Within less than a week from when we learned he had cancer, he wasn't with us, at least in the sense he had been until then. I didn't realize until after his passing, reading about your experiences in a book chapter on your relationship with nature and our 4-legged family member, that he had kept you from jumping off a cliff to put an end to your misery. Pretty ironic that throughout much of this hardship, I was working on my PhD, exploring experiences of hope. Naive or self-indulgent, perhaps, I still believe my efforts made a change. But the fact of the matter is that if RODI had been there on those walks, you might have been gone. anthropocentric maybe, but my gratitudes towards RODI for intervening like he did has made it impossible to think of non-human animals in the same way as I argue I somehow was raised to do. Growing up, I was prompted to believe that we, as in humans, are special, exceptional, or as Bennett puts it in the traditional so-called Western way of seeing things, humans are not only organic, unique, and so, but they are also occupy the top of the ontological hierarchy in a position superior to everything else on Earth. During my PhD studies, I struggled with positioning my research within a research paradigm, and what the different paradigms I grappled with had in common was that they were founded on an ontological divide between humans and the material world, including animals, others than us. The minute I walked out from the vet, passing the candlelight on the counter, encouraging a respectful atmosphere, I somehow knew that my attitudes towards non-human animals would not be the same as when I walked in those doors an hour before.
My perception of life and ontology vastly differ from your understanding or perception. My first happy memories are related to relationships with animals and nature, organic and inorganic nature, biota and abiota. To me, there was never a doubt. We all had the same value, the same status, the same flow of energy. We were just different parts of the same life force. I didn't, and I still don't fully understand how the world is connected, how the rocky and steep cliff I once considered jumping off, RODI, you, the heaven above us, the earth below us, and I are connected and somewhat parts of the same becoming. But already as a little girl, I felt a deep connection to everything around me, like a family.
How might one perceive a family if one envisions a flat, non-dualistic ontology? Hard to say, but I think it differs from what I've once pictured.
When I think back on my recovery, I think of flowers in my garden or birds that I fed with sunflower seeds and fresh water. Furthermore, I think of the joy I felt every spring when I heard baby birds chirping vigorously from the bird boxes in my garden, and when I spotted the more fragile perennials that sprouted after a long and harsh winter. I then think of the encounters between my feet and the ground, how the warmth from the slabs in my garden sent messages to my brain that I was part of a greater whole, and that this greater whole needed nothing more from me than to try to collaborate. Then I think of RODI, my beloved RODI. My recovery was totally intertwined with him, without relationship, without short but beautiful dance together on this earth.
Recovery, hope, we, family, it all entails more than the human, or as Bennett writes, it is futile to seek a pure nature unpolluted by humanity, and it is foolish to define the self as something purely human. Life, health, recovery have by no means been linear or predictable, despite our attempts to rationalize and connect the dots. In almost every measure taken by the healthcare system to help you, next of kin or family have not been included, much less any inquiries about anyone's companion species. Yet, knowing what we now know, bringing RODI into our family assemblage has had a huge impact on our lives. Returning to Bennett, one could say that RODI, by virtue of his particular location in an assemblage and the fortuity of being in the right place at the right time, made the difference, made things happen, made the decisive force catalyzing an event. A family assemblage does not prioritize what may qualify as human and stable, but emphasizes change, heterogeneity, and openness, a component whether human or non-human can couple or decouple with a family assemblage.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll live in hope, and in between times, perhaps Jim Deegan, would you possibly be able to step in and give your presentation now?
Sure, Tim. I'll go right ahead now. So my presentation is entitled "On the Edges of a Murmuration in a Childhood Imaginary." In an article entitled The Great Scarf of Birds in the New Yorker magazine in 1992, the Dutch filmmaker and photographer Jan van Eycken, who works at the interface of science and art with a focus on the secrets of nature, selected the novelist, poet and critic John Updike's poem of the same name as the best description of the aerial pageantry of starlings in Murmuration. I agree with Van Eycken, but our honourable mention goes to Mary Oliver's Starlings in Winter, Improbable and Beautiful and Afraid of Nothing, Samuel Taylor Coleridge's diary entries of starlings moving from orb to globe in quanta notebooks, and Italo Calvino's gusts of autumnal starlings over Rome in Mr. Palomar. And in the category of Away with the Birds, not forgetting Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart himself, who warrants a mention for his poem On the Riven Heart, written on the occasion of the elaborate funeral and procession of his muse and pet starling. Truly, starlings have been creating quite a flap in their one-and-wild lives. But here are some selected lines on this celestial mystery as described by Updike. As if out of the Bible or science fiction, a cloud appeared, a cloud of dots, like iron fillings, which a magnet underneath the paper undulates. And as I watched, one bird, prompted by accident or will to lead, ceased resting, and lifting in a casual billow, the flock ascended as a lady's scarf. These lines remind us of the fluid, rhythmic, sublime, embodied sensory and untapped potential of the metaphor of murmuration for autoethnography. More specifically, the metaphor brings forward themes of attachment, propinquity, separation, loss, trauma, and migration, resonant later in this presentation. Given the concept of the social imaginary is a contested term with non-consensual meaning, it is operationalized here following a clutch of social epistemologies as the creative and symbolic dimension of the social world, the dimension through which human beings create their ways of living together and their ways of representing their collective life, and imaginaries as pattern convocations of the social whole and modes of understanding which provide largely pre-reflexive parameters within which people imagine their social existence. In complement and counterpoint, in an article entitled Starlings Have a Darwinian Dance Partner in Living Bird magazine, Granger Hunt, a scientist with the Peregrine Fund in Boise, Idaho, in the US, provides a scientific variant on the theme and marvels at the way thousands of birds of a feather flock together like a dazzling cloud, swirling, pulsating, drawing together to the thinnest of wastes, then wildly twisting in pulses of enlargement and diminution in their migratory flight pattern to northern and eastern Europe. When one starling changes direction or speed, each of the other birds in the flock responds to the change. Hunt writes this high signal to noise ratio allows starlings to greatly enhance what researchers call effective perceptive range, which is another way of saying that a starling on one side of the flock can respond to what others are sensing all the way across the flock. And no starling wants to be on the edge for too long, because the edge is a place where you become vulnerable, confused, and confusing. The broader performative inquiry from which this fragment is drawn leans into the secret lore and language of deaf children in a state and religious residential school, weaving intensely personal and evocative stories of stigma, trauma, friendships, relationships, love, isolation, and displacement. The Irish ethnographer O'Connell stories his experiences of self and belonging. What follows is a bellwether or a highly developed instance of belonging, culled from O'Connell's book entitled Belonging, an Autoethnography of Life in Sign Language. In this short excerpt, he describes what could be described as an awakening to the use, purpose, and value of sign language in a time of official oralism. That is essentially the tension and contest between sign language and lip reading. He writes, "At home, my mother reads from a book filled with pictures of birds. She leans over and speaks to my ear. One morning, my mother teaches me something about birds, not in words or pictures, but through her actions, pointing at the sky where the birds are in full flight. Birds have wings, she says. They have wings that make them fly. Standing on the pavement later, we look up and pay attention to birds sitting perched on a wire. My mother points at a flock of birds darting across the sky. They are starlings, she says. As my eyes follow the direction of her finger, I watch with curious fascination at the feathered creatures swirl and loop about the sky, going in different speeds and directions. Sometime later, on the drive to the residential school for deaf children, for the first time, we pass through the two pillars at the gateway as my father turns the green Vauxhall Viva into a long stretch of avenue. From the passenger seat, my mother turns around and smiles nervously. We are here now, she says before quickly turning her back to me. Soon a smattering of boys emerge from the side entrance, and a nun dressed in blue slacks and a black veil gives chase, causing the children to scatter around like birds. The children gather together, turning and swooping to a spot where they stand and gaze at us with curious eyes. My gaze is averted to the children's hands, darting around their faces at great speed, like starlings in full flight, their hands creating rippling and swirling patterns as their fingers gracefully dance in the air. With my mother at my side and my father leading the way, we mount the steps to the front porch. I turn my head around and stare, fascinated by the children's hand movements. I watch with interest their fingers flexing into contours and shapes. Instinctively, I venture ahead to meet them, but the gentle hand of my mother's takes hold of my arm, stopping me in my tracks. She tells me not to run off, but sensing my newfound curiosity, leans down until her face is close to mine. They are deaf, like you. You will meet them later. In their article entitled The Rhythm of the Deaf Child in Qualitative Inquiry, Bolt and Valente describe experiences akin to O'Connell's as becoming other within the rhizomatic space as follows. The body constantly travels through ever-changing moments and contexts, accompanied by its ability to vary from what was or could be. This is the rhizomatic space, not a lacking body of corporeal deficiencies, but rather an incorporeal space where assumptions and codes of bodily lack are destratified. The body is constantly becoming within the rhizomatic space. The closing sequence in this short presentation is cinematic. A single camera pivots between ground and sky. On a virtual wraparound split screen, a fledgling starling stands, silhouetted against a flock of other starlings, travelling back, tumbling forward, like the reel and the flickering light they used in the cinema halls or picture houses of yesteryear. Standing within effective perceptive range, a young boy is silhouetted against a grey sky, watching acrobats in the freezing wind in the theatre of air, a fist of black dust in the wind, swooping and spinning, dipping and rising, floating and fluctuating, noisily in the silence, as an ink stain in drying pronounces its edges. Later, out of sight of the other, he enfolds his wings with their wings. Like the friends and relationships you have when you are very young, never closer the rest of your life. A gang that later would willfully embody a generative, transgressive, liberatory, and decolonizing sign language of their own during his childhood and adolescent days in a residential school for deaf children, which is elaborated in O'Connell's book, Belonging, in great detail. See him now ascending from the edge of a murmuration into a gusting and billowing convocation, a collision and communion of bodies and kindred souls collective, omnes et seculatum, each and all, improbable and beautiful, and afraid of nothing, briefly. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jim. And I think we better quickly check with Jessie, is there any sign of Harriet online anywhere? Harriet Marks.
Hello.
Aha. Hello, Harriet.
Would you like, is it, am I presenting a bit early? I thought I was presenting at 3:08.
No. No, this panel started at 2:30. But are you ready to present now, Harriet?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Mhm.
We talked briefly before about recording. Would you like to be recorded or not?
I'm okay with it being recorded, but could I decide about the sharing after, like we emailed?
Is that possible, Jessie? So, could yes, that's possible, Harriet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Harriet's presentation is entitled Neurodiversity, Community and Murmuration.
Thank
Take
you.
it away, Harriet.
Thank you. My sociology PhD is about the lived experiences of autistic women, as well as autistic individuals assigned female at birth, also known as AFABs, who may identify differently now, e.g. as male, non-binary or otherwise. I'm also looking into the media representations of these populations, and I've written the current draft of my literature review auto/biographically, weaving in my own experiences, as despite not currently being diagnosed, I reckon I'm probably autistic myself. Neurodivergence, the state of being neurodivergent, means having a brain that functions in ways that diverge significantly from the dominant societal standards of, quote, normal. Exactly who falls under this umbrella is sometimes debated, but it includes autistic people, dyslexic people, ADHDers, and people who are a combination of these things. The infinity symbol, which you'll see several times on my poster, represents autism, and I focus more on autism today due to this being my PhD focus. So interaction and friendship. Autism and other forms of neurodivergence can make socializing and interacting difficult, which can lead to issues with making and keeping friends. It can be difficult for neurodivergent people to decide whether to come out about their neurotype, as they may fear judgment and stigma. School, workplaces, public transport, and other places can be overwhelming for people who think differently, and there can be heightened social expectations towards females or those who are perceived as female to behave normally. While sometimes autism can be associated with social ambivalence or disinterest, many autistic people do want to communicate with others, but may find it especially difficult due to their communication challenges and preferences, as well as past experiences of bullying or mockery. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the virtual communities, for example, the work of Price and the work of Campbell. So Price 2022 argued that the first step to unmasking is accepting who you are and finding others with similar experiences. He says that nothing aided me in accepting myself and unmasking quite like finding my, quote, people. The more autistic voices I read and listened to, the less autism felt like a curse, and he explained that shame was replaced with pride. He also has a subheading in his book called Finding, Brackets, and Making Your Community, in which he talks about various examples of virtual communities like BDSM communities, Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, the My Little Pony fan club, and special interest meetups. When autistic people plan events, the environments can be tailored to their sensory and social needs, and these subcultures can show a glimpse of what a society that truly embraces neurodiversity might look like. Campbell 2023 says that the coming together of different autistic people, particularly in digital spaces, has contributed to the development of distinct autistic cultures. He also talks about info dumping and participants' experiences of that, which is when an autistic person or neurodivergent person, for example, an ADHDer, may give a lot of information on a topic without much back and forth with other people, less turn-taking and more hyper-focused / hyper-fixating. So one participant in that study also talked about how digital communication is safer because you can choose to edit yourself and you can choose when to step away. Also, it's one of the participants in that study said, social media has definitely been a very big factor in my journey of figuring out my identity, because if that didn't exist, then where would I go? And that was a quote that really stuck with me. Where would I go? So they also talked in that study about the deep dive, which is a bit of that first one about really looking into finding out your identity, and then the specification where you go off into finding a community that you belong in. So for example, a neurodivergent person may get their diagnosis or suspect that they're neurodivergent and do a real deep dive into researching and learning from other neurodivergent people. And then they might think, well, I've had enough of that. Now I'm going to stick with my more specific groups, for example, the Dungeons and Dragons groups, like we said earlier. So I'm just going to read my poem now, which is called Community. And this is a bit to do with my experiences of kind of neurodiversity, virtual communities and murmuration. Difference was lonely, people are phony, I've struggled with friendships and their random endings. What's the point in saying that? Where can I be sat? I don't want to be difficult, but my questions are infinite. Online feels easier, but it's not perfect either. Seeing people like me made me easier on myself. Alone in my room, without a costume, I felt most at home on the planet in my phone. In virtual communities celebrating neurodiversity, I see what the world could be if not designed neurotypically. So on the collage, which I've got to the right, which I made on an app called Shuffles, which allows you to make collages largely using posts from Pinterest. So a lot of those images are from Pinterest there. You'll see on the left, the third thing down, is a meme which reads, are you or a loved one suffering from autism spectrum disorder, the lack of autism? Check these symptoms to find out. And there are a lot of jokes like this in the kind of neurodivergent communities which I frequent. This is my favorite kind of category of humor that I see in these groups and these pages, because I think it's quite funny, but also has a little bit of usefulness to it. It's there's a video that I often see on social media, and it's by a comic called Joe Wells, who's autistic. And I'm just going to read out a quote from that, although if you watch the original, it'll be a bit funnier because he's got better comedic timing. But it says, so he said during his stand-up comedy routine, don't worry, not autistic people, you'll still get it, his comedy set. I have a good understanding of not autistic people because I have a brother who's not autistic. He's very severely not autistic. He can't talk to you without giving eye contact. He can't talk to you unless he's in a loud, crowded space. But with the right support, you can achieve anything you want. You're amazing, not autistic people. You inspire me. So these jokes are not to say that autism is not disabling and challenging, particularly those with high support needs and their parents and guardians, but it does challenge some of the pathologization and medicalization around autism and neurodivergence, and helps to show that some autistic traits may not necessarily be a bad thing. They've just been labeled that way. So in conclusion, I hope that in future there will be less dependence on virtual communities. Even though I'm talking all about virtual communities and they meant so much to me at the beginning of my self-diagnosis journey, I actually do see a lot of flaws in them. For example, a lot of arguments in them and a lot of risks to people's safety when they put on things about where they live. I do have a lot of concerns about the virtual communities, but what it would be really good to happen is if in the future there was less dependence on these, and what we've learned from these and what we see in these, which is the acceptance, the accessibility, if we could see that more offline. So here are my references. Hopefully you can see them there, and I'll just leave you with one quote, which is from Price again. Autistic people can step out of the soul-crushing cycle of reaching for neurotypical acceptance and being rejected despite our best efforts. Instead, we can support and uplift one another and create our own neurodiverse world where everyone, including neurotypicals, is welcome. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Harriet. I'm so glad we found you. That's brilliant. So we've got approximately 20 minutes now for discussion, comments, questions from within the room, or indeed people online. We can't see the rest of the people online. Jesse can, if you feel theirs. I'm going to pass this microphone to Freak Sanders.
Thank you. Yes, I don't know whether Knut or Roos could explain a little bit better for me what flattening the ontology is, because I find it a little bit difficult. And I know that Harman has a flat ontology as well, but I don't really know what it means. So maybe you can explain what it means for you then. That would be helpful.
A small challenge for you.
I'm glad you added what that means to me, because this is a difficult thing, I think, but this is an article which is now rejected, of course, but which started out with playing with the name RODI, which is not how you're supposed to write an article, probably. But to me, because 8 minutes is kind of a harsh thing. So I've grappled with ontologies and epistemology throughout my short and brief career as an academic. I find it difficult, but it's always been privileging the human discourses. I'm a nurse. I have a PhD in psychology. There's nothing wrong with any of that, but humans have always been privileged in a way, the center, anthropocentric. And then I came across some references to post-humanism, new materialism, and started reading. I was interested. And I sort of had this other presentation where I call myself a late bloomer, and I probably am. But I sort of found ways of thinking about ontology in different ways than I was raised. So it's a dialogue, because I think we perceive the world differently, but this is mostly related to research. So you could say that the alternative would be that people or humans are on top, whereas on a flat or non-dualistic ontology, things are like in an assemblage. And these are words that I grapple with, but everything can be just as important, have a role, have agency. I've been very fascinated by that Bennett book that I've read, which is called Vibrant Matter, which kind of, it turns everything I learned during my education kind of upside down. Was that close to an answer?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry.
I think where humans are on top, it is flattening it out. So you don't say humans are at the top of the pyramid, but everything is equal.
Not necessarily
Equal, no, but yeah. Yeah. But I think I better understand you. Yes. Yes.
Well, just to follow up on that, I picked up on this idea of it's the dog doing the intervention, right? Right. So maybe they're on top, which was true for us. We adopted a puppy during the second week of the COVID lockdown, and I'll have to say the dog did an intervention on my isolation, right? In a way that I should have expected, because I've had dogs all my life, but this particular puppy became bonded to me directly in a way that saved me from what could have been despair, I think. And also they make you go outside. So it was beautiful. I loved your paper.
About the quality of the language as well, but I'll pass this to Gail, because Paul Strong first.
Okay, because it was a sort of follow-up to both of you in a way, but the thinking, it extends to all three presentations, and I'd just like to say how brilliant they all were, and just as in earlier strands, it's just been so good having these little strands because, you know, it sparked off connections in my brain anyway. But I'd sort of wanted to follow up on the flattened ontology in a way. And Knut and Rosemary, yeah, I mean, fantastic. I mean, just so moving. And then use that as a sort of almost way to bring in the other two. Because, okay, I'm going to ask the impossible generalized question of which I'd really be interested in thoughts of all three presenters on if we, because I think you're all speaking in a way about extending beyond the usual kind of hierarchy of the fleshly human being in front of you, and where we draw the line. So in terms of your presentation, Knut, and Rosemary, is it? Yeah. If they could develop a kind of AI sophisticated companion animal, was it RODI to liveness? Does that make a difference? I wondered, or you know, because I was thinking some of my best relationships, here's a confession, and I honestly think some of my save my life sort of relationships are with dead people, and dead people I never met as well, you know, not dead related people. And so that's interesting to me. Is it live or whatever? And then Harriet, you were talking about the powerfulness of virtual communities, and though they've got their flaws, as you say, the advantages in, you know, finding a place to connect with. And Jim, you were talking about the starlings, and I loved your quote about being on, you know, nobody wants to be on the edge. So you want to find a place within a community. And I don't know, again, maybe I'm really interested in your take on this, but I was thinking, yeah, it's a wonderful image to think through that helps me to feel part of a greater whole. So it's not necessarily about the human. It's not necessarily about, is it? I don't know. I'd just be interested in what your thoughts on this. Where are there any limitations to the flattened ontology where we can find succor and comfort and perhaps even love?
Thanks, Paul.
Over to you, Jim.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think that there's one or essentialist answer to this, because I used what for some would be the kind of whimsical example of Mozart's elaborate funeral and procession for his pet starling and muse. So obviously some people can develop an incredible attachment to animals of different kinds. But to be very honest with you, when the call went out for this year's theme, it immediately resonated with a single line in a book for me, which I thought was a very powerful metaphor of a mother trying to explain to her child the birds in the air were starlings. And then when he went on his first visit to a residential school for deaf kids and saw the same animation in the kids as they were using sign for the first language, he equated that with the starling. So I suppose at the end of the day, what I'm talking about here is animals as metaphors for human life and human relationship. That was what I was about in that particular paper. And then the idea of the edge in this case is, as I understand it scientifically, as starlings fly, one can pull, as if it were, the flock to the left or the right. And that's the most vulnerable position. But invariably, that starling returns to the fold and more centrally And I was using that metaphorically to describe the fact that the boy in question, his name was Noel, was on the edge of a murmuration and was waiting for that opportunity to join the flock. So, so I think we can have metaphors of human-animal relationships that abide with us throughout our lives. And I think that is essentially the essence of my paper.
Shall I jump in and answer?
Yes, please, Harriet.
Yeah, thank you. So the question that you asked, kind of to do with the fleshly human being and people kind of finding each other within the neurodivergent community, that bit. I think the thing about whether people are human, whether autistic people are human, is something that's come up quite a lot in the literature, which I didn't expect. So there's often a media representation that autistic people are subhuman, above human, never human, but never just equal to other humans. It's always that they've got superpowers and they're way above, or they've got all these challenges and deficits, so they're way below, but they're never just on the same playing field, just humans like neurotypicals and allistic people are. And there's also kind of a tendency for the characters to be supernatural, kind of adding to them not being human, maybe having like special powers. And then just the other thing related to that I was thinking of was that when I've read a lot about autism and empathy and autism and humour, in both of those contexts, I've read about various people saying autistic people lack humour, so in a way they lack humanity. Autistic people lack empathy, so in a way they lack humanity, when actually neither's true anyway. Some autistic people have hyper empathy, some do struggle with empathy. There's 3 different types of empathy. So it's a lot more complicated than it gets portrayed as. I mean, one of the quotes I gave today was from an autistic comedian, so obviously it's not as simple as saying that all autistic people don't have a sense of humour, but it's interesting that even if someone did struggle with humour and did struggle with empathy, why would it be argued that they're any less human? Why would it be argued that you know, that difference makes them not a human anymore? So that's all I can really think of to relate what you said about the fleshly human being. I hope that's okay. Oh, and apologies again for the mix up with the times. I thought this was like 3 to 3:50. I thought mine was like the second one, so I just got it all a bit wrong, so apologies.
Don't worry about it, Harriet. It's absolutely fine, and that was a brilliant answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to cover. I've got 2 people waiting for a question. I'm going to come to Gail Leatherby and then to Annalise, if that's okay, Annalise.
Thank you. Thank you. All 3 papers really, really, really great. I have a comment and then a question for all of you. So I don't know how much is written about this, but from another area of my life, I know how significant other than human, better than human animals are in terms of keeping people alive. You know, lots and lots of evidence. And so I really do hope you get it published. I think it's really important that you do. So, but a question for all 3 is, I was kind of struck by coping and hoping, and I'm wondering what the relationship is between coping and hoping. Sorry, I've silenced you all now. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take a try at that one. Yeah, I think if I was to dig deeply into my presentation, there is a line between what was a coping mechanism for a person who was deaf and his mother. It was a means of communication for them. But when that person then moved into a context of kindred spirits for the first time, that coping mechanism seemed to recede and hope seemed to come forward. And that's what I tried to capture very much in the final words of the presentation, where, if you like, he was joining a community that was going to be very hopeful for him, and that and yeah, so I'm thinking, if you like, about my paper in response to your question more than something that I thought of before. And as well, I should say that coping for me has to do with with managing, being resourceful and whatever have you. But the image of the starlings has an aesthetic as well to it, which gives us great hope. Thank you.
So should I give an answer? Yeah. With the coping and hoping, my first thought just honestly is that a lot of neurodivergent communities, I enjoyed my time in them for the deep dive phase, as Campbell talked about, but then I have found them quite depressing. So I haven't found them very hopeful. I feel like people kind of say a lot of awful things they've been through with bullying and things like that. And it's really important that they talk about it. But sometimes for myself, I find it a little bit much and a little bit hard and quite a sensitive soul. So I find it quite hard to read through it all just on a weekend or an evening. So I've definitely gone into more the specification one. But definitely when I'm reading the books by autistic women, there's a lot of pushing towards being hopeful for the future. Chloe Hayden talks in her book, she likens her whole experiences in her book towards fairy tales, and talks about the beginning of the fairy tale, the villains, and she talks a lot about the sidekicks and the importance of sidekicks. And she's got ADHD, so she's an ADHD around autistic. And there is this like movement towards hope from some of these autistic women that are coming out. I think it's the reason a lot of them are coming out to talk about their experiences is because they feel that there's something to move towards. And then just my last point to do with that is that people often misuse the word neurodiversity because it refers to the different ways that we all think and process the world. But some people kind of use it to mean the neurodiversity movement, when the neurodiversity movement is a lot more hopeful. It's about social justice, it's a human rights movement, and it's about making a lot of change. So we can kind of recognize neurodiversity without doing anything, but that's not good enough. We need to recognize the neurodivergent movement, the neurodiversity movement, in trying to make some changes and make things more accessible. So yeah, I think some people have all their different ways of coping, but for me, I tried to focus on, in my personal time, reading the more hopeful accounts of what we can change rather than the ones about how sad it all is now.
Harriet, thank you so much. I'm going to quickly move to Annalise. I think we've got about a minute left to get some answers. I'll make a comment.
Okay. Wow, that's pushing me. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to Jim for those beautiful images that you were able to share with us. Now, I'm Rosemary. Thank you very much. I rescued a kitten when I was exceedingly unwell, and it definitely saved my life, and is sitting in the corner watching me now. But my question was for Harriet. And I'm a late diagnosed autistic ADHD woman, got diagnosed in my late 40s, 50s, so it's all quite new to me. And I wondered, with your virtual communities, is that removal from society a kind of safety net that actually, personally, I know that I am so much safer behind a camera and not in a room with everybody, and it's easier for me. And I wondered whether that was a theme that you found throughout.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. Thank you. I've definitely seen the word safety come up a lot when I've been looking at these virtual communities, not to do with kind of literal safety in terms of risk online, but more to do with that feeling of safety, like you say. A lot of people spoke about in the past research, like in Campbell's research, about being able to control the sensory environment at home and that being safer, being able to take themselves out of a situation, being able to turn the volume down on the screen, being able to kind of just have that control over the environment. So yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of links to the safety. And then, like you say, at the moment, the virtual communities do feel quite removed from society, but it would be nice if we could integrate some of the things that make the virtual community safe for neurodivergent people in kind of the wider neurodiverse society. So yes, I do think it's quite removed. I don't think a lot of people know some of the discussions and debates that we're having, and the comfort and the support and the empowerment that we give to each other. But hopefully they will at some point. Hopefully, you know, that will be something that improves. Is that quick enough?
That was great. Thank you. Being so fast and so thorough. What a fantastic panel. I think we'd all agree. Thank you, everyone. Quickly, so appreciate it.